Catherine sat at her desk, the soft hum of the office around her a constant reminder of her place in the family business. She had always been the silent worker, the one who did the heavy lifting while her brother, Dominic, basked in the spotlight. The $5 million project, the one she had painstakingly built from the ground up, was now on the verge of its biggest deal yet. And yet, she wasn't invited to the most crucial meeting. She wasn't even told about the flight. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an oversight. No, this was deliberate. Dominic had planned this. He had deliberately excluded her. Her heart sank, but there was no time for tears. The knot in her stomach told her everything she needed to know. It wasn't just her absence from the flight that stung. It was the exclusion from the family's vision of success, the family's tight-knit control, and her brother's reign over it all. She had been cast aside once again. Catherine closed her eyes, leaning back in her chair. It wasn't new, this feeling. She had always been the one in the background, never truly seen for her worth. But today something inside her snapped. She wasn't going to let it slide this time. Her phone buzzed, but she ignored it. The office was alive with the usual Monday rush, everyone else moving in their own little worlds, oblivious to the emotional storm brewing in hers. Then, as if on cue, her sister-in-law, Brenda, walked into her office. Brenda, with her perfectly styled hair, her perfect smile, the woman who always had something to say when it came to putting Catherine in her place. Catherine, Brenda's voice was as sharp as a knife. You're still here? Shouldn't you be getting ready for the next big meeting? Catherine remained silent, her gaze steady on the papers in front of her. She knew what was coming, the words she could never escape. You know, Brenda continued, her voice dripping with sarcasm. You're just trash. Don't pretend you matter. There it was, the insult, public, cold, calculated. Catherine's heart pounded. The anger rose inside her, but she didn't give it a voice. Instead, she simply stared at Brenda, her silence louder than any words could be. I won't let this destroy me, she thought to herself, the words echoing in her mind. Brenda seemed to expect some kind of reaction, but Catherine didn't give her the satisfaction. She stood, slowly, silently, and walked past Brenda without a word. The nerve, the audacity. She felt the sting, but it wasn't a wound anymore. It was fuel, a fire she was only just beginning to understand. She headed straight for her office, slamming the door behind her. Inside, the small space, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. Catherine stood in front of her desk, staring at the empty chair. She wanted to scream, to lash out, but she didn't. She couldn't. She had learned to be silent, to keep her emotions at bay. But silence, she realized, wasn't weakness. Silence was control. Silence was her weapon now. Sitting at her desk, Catherine opened her laptop, her fingers hovering over the keys. She had to think. She had to plan. This wasn't the time for impulsive reactions. This was the time for strategy. She clicked on her email. There, at the top of the inbox, was a message from Michael Cole, her trusted friend and lawyer. The subject line simply read, I have what you need. Her heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the moment that could change everything. She took a deep breath and clicked open the message. The words were simple, but they hit harder than any insult. It's time. Let me know when you're ready. Catherine felt a surge of resolve. The insults, the exclusions, the manipulation. It was all part of a game, but she had the upper hand now. This wasn't just about a flight. It wasn't about Brenda's cruel words. This was about her taking control, about proving that she was more than just the quiet, overlooked sister. It was time to fight back, not with anger, but with intelligence, with patience, and with a plan that would make them all regret ever underestimating her. Catherine closed her laptop, her thoughts racing. She had been playing the part of the passive sister for far too long. It was time to flip the script. And this was just the beginning. She looked at the clock. It was almost time for the meeting that she had been deliberately excluded from. She wasn't going to sit by idly anymore. There were other ways to win, and she was ready to take them all down, one by one. Catherine took a deep breath as she entered the sleek, glass-walled boardroom. The modern, high-tech surroundings were a sharp contrast to the storm brewing inside her. Today was the day she would take control, not just of the conversation, but of her future. The table in front of her was a symbol of the power Dominic held, but she was no longer afraid of the glare of its cold, polished surface. She wasn't supposed to be here. She had not been invited to the meeting, but that didn't matter now. The boardroom was where decisions were made, and she had a decision of her own to make. She would be a part of this conversation, whether they liked it or not. As she stepped into the room, she caught the surprised glance of her brother, Dominic. His eyes narrowed, sensing the shift in the air. She knew he didn't expect her to show up. He thought she would simply accept her role as the quiet, invisible sister, sidelined in favor of the real players. But she wasn't that person anymore. Eliza, sitting next to Dominic, barely acknowledged her presence. Catherine could feel the divide between them. Eliza's neutral stance was evident, her silence almost complicity in the game that was being played. But Catherine didn't let it bother her. The message from Michael rang in her mind. It's time to make your move. Her focus remained on Dominic. His facade of control wavered for a second as she walked to her seat, but he quickly masked it with a tight smile, his ever-present arrogance back in full force. "Glad you could join us, Catherine," Dominic said, his voice dripping with mock politeness. "Perhaps you're here to explain why you're still hanging around after being left off the flight." Catherine's heart didn't race. Instead, it hardened. This was the moment. She wouldn't waste it. She looked him in the eye and smiled, her voice calm, steady. "I'm here because I belong here. You may not think so, but I built this company, Dominic. I built it from the ground up, and I'm not going anywhere." Her words were simple, but they hung in the air like a challenge. She could feel the room tense. Dominic's smugness faltered slightly, but he quickly regained his composure. "Do you?" he replied, raising an eyebrow. "I've been running this company for years. What exactly is it you think you're contributing, Catherine?" Her mind was already working. The pieces were falling into place. She knew the cracks in his facade. She knew how to exploit them. "Funny," she said, leaning back in her chair. "I thought it was me who held the project together. You can't run a company on empty promises, Dominic. If you're so sure of your position, then why have I been the one keeping it all from falling apart?" Twist S4. Eliza, who had been watching silently, leaned forward, her face strained. "You should be careful, Catherine," she murmured, almost in a whisper. "You don't know everything." Catherine's eyes locked on her sister's. Eliza wasn't just speaking for Dominic anymore. She was speaking for herself. Eliza had always known about the company's financial troubles. She had been too afraid to speak up. But now, she had confirmed Catherine's suspicions. Dominic had been hiding something. "You're right," Catherine said, her voice low. "I don't know everything. But what I do know is enough to make you rethink your next move." Eliza's face flushed with guilt, but she didn't speak again. Catherine had planted a seed of doubt, and now it was time to water it. The meeting continued, but Catherine wasn't really listening to the numbers being tossed around. She was calculating her next move, knowing that the more Dominic tried to cover up, the more mistakes he would make. She wasn't just here to challenge him in words. She was here to set the stage for his fall. Twist S5. During the meeting, Catherine subtly steered the conversation toward the company's future. "We need to be careful," she said, her voice steady but carrying weight. "With the financial instability we're facing, continuing business as usual is a risk we can't afford." Her words hung in the air, the tension thick. She didn't need to say more. Dominic's expression darkened, his hand gripping the edge of the table. He knew she had caught him in the act. The room grew silent, and for a brief moment, Catherine felt the power shift. Dominic's eyes flickered with a brief flash of panic, before he regained his composure. Twist S6. Catherine! Dominic snapped, his voice laced with anger. Let's not pretend you have any idea what you're talking about. Your loyalty to this company has always been questionable. Catherine didn't flinch. In fact, she smiled. Loyalty? She asked, her voice dripping with irony. If anyone here is disloyal, it's you. You've been covering up mistakes, hiding debts, and playing everyone for fools. Dominic's face turned pale. He opened his mouth to retaliate, but Catherine was faster. It's interesting, she continued, how you always manage to spin the narrative. You talk about loyalty, but you've been the one undermining this family for years. The room was silent. The power dynamic had shifted once again, but this time it wasn't Dominic who was in control. It was Catherine. As the meeting concluded, Catherine stood up and straightened her blazer, her heart pounding with a mix of satisfaction and anticipation. Dominic's face was red with fury, but he said nothing. He knew he had lost this round. Twist S6. As she left the meeting room, Catherine's phone buzzed. It was a message from Michael. I have everything you need to expose him. It's time to make your move. Catherine's heart raced. She had what she needed. And now, she was ready to play the game on her terms. Catherine stood before the full-length mirror in her office, her reflection steady but filled with quiet resolve. The woman she saw staring back at her wasn't the passive figure she had once been, the one who had been pushed around, belittled, and ignored. No, this woman was different. She was ready to step into her power, to claim what had always been hers. Her fingers brushed the edge of the desk, where the manila folder from Michael lay, containing the evidence that could destroy Dominic. She had everything she needed. The pieces were all falling into place. Now it was time for the final act. Twist S7. The evidence that Michael had provided was damning. A detailed record of Dominic's mismanagement, shady deals, and the company's mounting debt. Catherine could feel the weight of it in her hands, the gravity of what it could mean. But the real challenge now was how to play it. How could she expose him without giving him the chance to spin the narrative? She thought back to the years of silence, the years spent feeling invisible, unsure of her worth in both the family and the company. Every sacrifice, every ignored contribution, every time Dominic had taken the credit for her hard work, it all led to this moment. This was her chance to reclaim her place at the table, to show them all just how wrong they had been about her. Michael's words echoed in her mind. You're not just fighting for the business, Catherine. You're fighting for your future. A deep breath steadied her nerves. She wasn't going to back down. She wouldn't let Dominic continue to manipulate the family, to control their narrative. The time for apologies and silent suffering was over. Now she would take control. Dominic had always prided himself on his ability to manipulate and control. But this time, Catherine had the upper hand, and she knew exactly how to use it. The family's board meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon, and Catherine knew this would be the final showdown. She had already planned her move. The moment she stepped into that room, everything would change. Twist S8. As the meeting began, Dominic stood at the head of the table, his usual confidence exuding from every word. But Catherine wasn't intimidated. She had prepared herself for this moment. She sat at the table, poised and calm, her mind focused. Thank you all for coming, Dominic said, his voice smooth as ever. Today, we'll be discussing our plans for the company's future, especially as we face these recent financial challenges. Catherine met his gaze, her heart steady. She wasn't here to ask for permission. She wasn't here to apologize. She was here to take back control. Dominic glanced over at her, a flicker of suspicion crossing his face as he noticed how calm she seemed. His fingers gripped the edge of the table, the subtle signs of unease hidden beneath his practiced exterior. You know, he began, trying to regain control of the room. I've been thinking about our direction. We need to make some hard decisions, some sacrifices. Catherine leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. I couldn't agree more, she said, her voice cool. But I don't think those sacrifices should be made on the backs of the people who built this company from the ground up. The tension in the room thickened. Dominic's jaw tightened, but Catherine continued, her words cutting through the silence. I've spent years working tirelessly for this company, and yet I've been excluded, ignored, pushed aside. But that's not what I'm here to talk about today. Her voice grew more pointed as she turned to face the others at the table, the board members who had quietly watched the power struggle between the siblings. You're all aware that we've been facing financial instability, and I'm sure you've all heard the rumors. The truth is, this company's financial state is far worse than any of you know, and it's all because of Dominic's mismanagement. The room went silent. Dominic's face turned white with shock, but Catherine pressed on, undeterred. She knew what she had to do. She reached for the manila folder in front of her, slowly pulling out the documents that would expose everything. Twist S9. Catherine stood, the room watching in rapt silence as she slid the first page of the documents across the table. Here, she said, her voice steady, is the proof. Dominic's financial mismanagement, the illegal deals, the debts he's been hiding. I have everything, and I'm not the only one who knows. Your leadership has been a lie. Dominic's eyes widened as the board members leaned in to examine the documents. He opened his mouth to speak, but Catherine raised a hand to silence him. You've been running this company like your personal empire, she said, and now it's time for the truth to come out. All the manipulation, all the corruption, it ends today. Dominic stood, his fists clenched. You don't know what you're doing, Catherine, he growled. You think this is about the company? It's about power. It's always been about power. You're right, she said, her tone colder than ever. It's always been about power, but not for me. Not anymore. She took a step forward, her voice gaining strength. This isn't just about the company. This is about me taking control of my own life. It's about reclaiming what you tried to take from me. Emotion surged in Catherine as she watched the board members process the evidence, their eyes flicking between Dominic and her. The fear, the doubt that had plagued her for so long, began to dissipate. She wasn't just an employee. She wasn't just the ignored sister. She was the one in control now. Dominic stammered, his confidence shattered. You're making a mistake, he spat. You'll regret this. I'm your brother. Catherine didn't flinch. No, Dominic. You've made the mistake, and now you'll face the consequences. As she stood there in front of the people who had once ignored her, Catherine felt a wave of relief and power. This was her moment. She had taken control, and as the room erupted into chaotic conversation, Catherine stood tall, knowing that her victory was just beginning. Cliffhanger. Just as the room descended into chaos, Dominic tried one last desperate attempt at control. But Catherine's final words rang out, firm and resolute. This is my victory, Dominic. Not just over you, but over everything you tried to take from me.